All right, when it comes to your retirement plan, please know this one thing. Please know how it is. That's how they came up with the numbers, and you got to know the inputs. And this is the one critical part. I was dealing with a guy yesterday. I think he was running for Vanguard, running a plan through Vanguard. And they said on the upside you'll have 33 million at your death. On the low side you have 6 million at your death. And he was, and rightly said, I was pretty satisfied with that. So the first thing I said is, what inputs are they using? And he said, I'm not sure, and that's fine. He doesn't need to know. I mean, he should, but he doesn't need to because no one ever says what their inputs. But you do need to know this. So I told him, I said, well, you got to find out, because if they're using inputs are based on historical rates of return, that's problematic in my estimation. And he doesn't know. I don't know because I didn't see the plan. So that's up to him to find out. But what I want to show you here is not just historical rates of return versus future projections. When it comes to running retirement plans, there is this thing called the Monte Carlo analysis. And the Monte Carlo analysis simply says that's how we got the safe withdrawal rate, essentially. Basically saying, what is it if I were to take out a certain amount of money, what's the likelihood of my retirement being successful, i.e. that I have money left in my portfolio at my demise. All right, that's what's called the Monte Carlo. And what a Monte Carlo is doing is they're just using simple inputs. This is our average expected rate of return, and this is the volatility around the average expected rate of return. All right, so what happened in the old days, we used to have these linear rates of return. We'd say this is what Dave Ramsey uses. It's crazy. A 10% rate of return on average each and every year. So it'd be like this. We're going to get 10% rate of return on average, and we're going to get each and every year 10%, 10%, 10%. And so that would mean you could take 6% out and never run out of money. You could take 6% out because you're getting 10% on average, and you never run out of money because you'd be adding 4% to capital. Now, people get really upset with me when I said Dave Ramsey had a video on that. He did. I watched the video, man, and I'm just like, this. That's just not good. It's not good. That's silly. No one uses linear rates of return anymore, because if you did, we'd all be getting, there'd be no 4% rule at all. The reason the 4% rule came in is because while the average is 10% a year, that's the average. The problem is that the markets go like this. They go up and down. So here you might have got 20%. Here you got negative 10. Here you might have got 13%, but here you got -8 or something like that. You see how that works? But the trajectory is to the northeast, but it's still up and down, up and down. And it's a whole lot different pulling 7% of a portfolio that's down than pulling 7% of a portfolio that's up. And so if you happen to catch it on a bad cycle, 2000, 2001, and 2002, you're doomed. So what happened is that's where the Bill Bengen 4% rule came in, because he looked historically from, he did it in 1994. So I think he looked from 1926 to 1985 or 1990, I can't remember. And he said, historically, you could have taken 4% a year out of your portfolio and never ran out of money, all right, historically. And those were basically what we've all kind of consolidated with the 4% rule. And then we've kind of further along that, we run a Monte Carlo analysis, which uses standard deviations and average rates of return. And that is the input that determines your percentage of success. Is we're saying we're going to use an average rate of return of X, and we're going to use a standard deviation of Y, and Z is going to show you the percentage of success, i.e. will you have a good chance of running out of money or not. So let me show you. This is from the Kitces blog. Kitces from 2017. This is so critical. You've got to know this stuff. You've got to know how their inputs are made. I'm telling you right now. So this is a normal distribution of market returns, a good old-fashioned bell curve. Nothing fancy here. All right. So the average, the mean and the average is equal. The average in this case is 5%. So we're saying, Josh, you're going to get 5% on average as your rate of return. All right, so what I do is this is what you got to know. 5% is the average, and we're going to have a standard deviation of 10. So we have to know what the standard deviation is and what the average rate of returns are. You've got to know that. Average rates of return 5, standard deviation is 10. So what this means here, that means within 68% of the time, we'll just say 2/3 of the time. So we have 100 different retirement scenarios, 68% of the time, your portfolio, on any given year, I should say, your portfolio will return 10 points off the average because that's one standard deviation. 68% of the time, your portfolio will return 10 points off the average. So if the average is 5, 68% of the time, we'd expect you to either get a plus 15, because 5 plus 10 is 15, or a negative 5, because 5 minus 10 is negative 5. 5, or 10 minus 5 is negative 5. Yeah, 10 minus 5 is negative 5. So remember, one standard deviation. We have 5 as the average, and we go 10 on either side. So 68% of the time, you'll get between negative 5 and plus 15. 95% of the time, 2 standard deviations, so it's 20 on each side. You'll get positive 25 or negative 15. 28% of the 100 times we run the scenario, 95 times of the 100 times we run the scenario, or 1,000 times or whatever, your portfolio will give you either 25% on the up or 15% on the down, any place within there. Does that make sense? So you could get 95% of the time, you could get negative 15 or positive 25 or anything in between, 95% of the time. 3 standard deviations is about 99% of the time. So 99% of the time, you'll get between negative 25 and positive 35. So that is critically important, because we're saying on any given year, you might be up 35%, you might be down 35%. And if you don't know those inputs, then how are you going to factor out if your portfolio is successful or not? Because I can make everyone Bill Gates with software. I can say, look, our average rates of return are 12%, but we're only having a 1 standard deviation. And that means you'll never run out of money. If you're only pulling 5% a year out, you're adding 7% a year to capital, which is stupid. No one does that. But you got to figure out those two numbers. Now, if we have an average rate of return, so let's do this now. So I hope that makes sense. So again, your mean is the average, and your standard deviation is how much around the average it is, or how much off the average. Our average is 5. Our standard deviation is 10. 1 standard deviation, we're going to be 10 off the average on either side. So 10 minus 5, or 5 minus 10 is negative 5. 5 plus 10 is positive 15. So let's flip these numbers around to see if you guys, so right now we got average rates of return is 5, standard deviation is 10. We're going to flip them around. Say average rate of return is 10, standard deviation is 5. We're just going to flip these around here real quick. All right. So let's go back to here. All right. So what we do is we say, we should change this around just a tad, make it a little bit easier. So we're going to say average rates of return 5 as rates of return 10, and then standard deviation is 5. All right. So the first thing we do is we draw our bell curve, and we draw something down the middle that says what is our average rates of return. We're going 10. Does that make sense? All right. So in this case, we have a 5 as a standard deviation, and we say, okay, 66% of the time, we're going to have 5 or 15 will be the variability of the returns. 5 because it'll be 5 off the average. So 10 minus 5 is 5. 10 plus 5 is 15. That's 68% of the time. 95% of the time, it's going to be 20. It'll be 25 and 0. Not negative 0, just 0, because we are. So 95% of the time, we're going to be, screw that up. The standard deviation is 5. 95% of the time, we're going to be 20 on the upside, because our average is 10. 5 is a standard deviation. 2 standard deviations is 5 plus 5. 95% of the time, we'll make 20% on our money, or we won't make anything on our money. We'll break even. because 5 is the standard deviation. So 10 minus 5 is 0. All right, so the question is, 99% of the time, what will it be? And I'll let you guys answer that. 99% of the time, what's it going to be for our Monte Carlo analysis in terms of using 3 standard deviations? 99% of the time, our portfolio will give us what on the positive and what on the negative. I'll let you put that on the comments if you would. And if you don't want to put the comments, just see if you figured that out. Just say yay or nay if you want to, or whatever, however you want to put it, because it's important. So 99% of the time is what we're looking for 3 standard deviations to figure out, are you going to have a 68% probability of success or 98% probability of success? If it's 98% probability of success, that just means twice out of 100, you had no money when you died. No liquid assets when you died. That's it. No big deal. All right. Now, if it's 66% success rate, that means 34% of the time you had no liquid assets when you died. And it's a little bit concerning. The reason this is important is because I am using, I don't have it here, but the Vanguard numbers, and the Vanguard numbers aren't great, man. I think it's a 6% on average is the stocks. All right. And then they have a 18% standard deviation. So 6% is our average, with an 18 standard deviation. And so for simplicity, you don't even need to do the bell curve. All you got to do is say 68% of the time, we are going to be, let's see, so I take my trusty calculator. I say 6 minus 18, because that's a standard deviation. So 6 minus 18 is negative 12 to positive 24. All right, 95% of the time, it's going to be negative 30. 24 plus 18 to 42, and 99% of the time it's going to be negative 48 to, was that positive 60? Is that right? Yeah, 60. All right, so when you have a 6 as a standard deviation, and you have a 6 as an average rate of return, and an 18 as a standard deviation, you're literally just taking 6, adding 18, which is 24, adding 18, which is 42, right? 24 plus 18 is 42. Yep, and then adding 18, which is 60. 99% of the time, you should get 60 on the up. So 99% of the time on any given year, you should get 60 on the up or a negative 48 on the down. And again, they're just taking 6 as the average, subtracting by 18. So 1 standard deviation is negative 12. 2 standard deviations is negative 12 minus 18, which is negative 30. And 3 standard deviations is negative 48. So you can get a pretty good gauge there that your portfolio is going to be, I mean, that's pretty spot on, man. That is pretty spot on. Negative 48 to positive 60. That's, I bet if you look historically, you'll see that almost to a T, actually. So then the question comes in, okay, well then if I got negative 60, what's the, so here's how Monte Carlo kind of works negatively. It says, look, all these things are independent of the other in terms of, if you got negative 60, in theory, you could get another negative 60. And not likely to happen, but in theory you could. I mean, that's literally never happened, but that's the nice thing about Monte Carlo is that it's very, going back to this guy's article right here. Let's get out of this. Hold on a second. Going back to this guy's article right here, if we look at the headline, does Monte Carlo analysis actually overstate tail risk projections? And the tail risk would be, you're not going to get negative 60, most likely. I mean, I can't predict, I can't prove the future, but it's never happened before, and Monte Carlo assumes that something like that could happen. All right, I mean, it could. That's the issue. So, but Monte Carlo, a lot of people say, I only have a 68% probability of success. Well, yeah, because if you got negative 60% by negative 60% in 2 consecutive years, you're doomed. That's not likely to happen, though. But anyway, you got to understand the inputs, man. I'm telling you, the one thing for your financial plan is you got to understand this. I hope this helps. I'd love to hear your questions. Love to hear your comments. See if you couldn't figure out that answer that I asked you, because it's important. Anytime you're running a scenario, you got to ask the inputs. What is your standard deviation and what is your average rates of return? First and foremost, that's what you got to know. Well, you also need to know their inflation, the cost of living going up for Social Security, Medicare, but for investments, those two things are you gotta understand. All right, love to hear your comments. We'll see you.